And call up our final panel. The subject is building solutions, and we'd like to welcome Angela Perry, policy analyst from the Institute for College Access and Success, and Kat Walbeck, the Civil Rights Counsel from the Student Borrower Protection Center. Thank you so much for being here.
I would like to start out by echoing everyone else's thanks for assembling this hearing and really taking a look at these really critical issues. I am here to provide some information to echo some of the earlier concerns we heard with information on how for-profit colleges specifically contribute to the student debt struggles of California. The Institute of College Access and Success is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research and policy organization with headquarters in Oakland and Washington. We focus on federal and California state policy aimed at improving college affordability, equity, and accountability. So that's how we come to this work. I specifically look at for-profit students often, and student debt is a problem for many students, but its impact can be especially outsized for students at for-profit colleges. Graduates of for-profit institutions are more likely to have debt than their peers from public and nonprofit schools, and they generally end up with more debt overall from their educations. Nearly 65% of students at California four-year for-profit schools take out loans to pay for their education, which is almost twice as many as the number of students that attend public programs. Graduates from four-year for-profit schools also leave with an average of $31,345 in debt, which is twice as much as students graduating from public universities in California. Particularly troubling are the struggles these students face when it comes to repaying their debt. While students enrolled at for-profit colleges represent only 9% of higher education students in California, they account for half of the student loan defaults in the state. The U.S. Department of Education recently released updated data on how well borrowers are paying down their debt, and more than half, 55%, of borrowers from California schools who are not paying down their principals had attended for-profit schools. When California students are harmed by for-profit institutions, it is low-income families, African Americans, and women that are disproportionately affected. 55% of students enrolled at for-profit colleges are low-income, 15% are African American, and 63% are female. These are all higher than the average percentages when compared to public and nonprofit institutions. Bad actors in this sector have historically targeted the most disadvantaged groups, the students most in need of the benefits higher education can offer, but who can least afford this debt. Concerns about poor quality programs resulting in unaffordable debt led the Obama administration to create the Gainful Employment Rule, which required poorly performing programs to improve in order to stay eligible for federal financial aid. Data made available under the rule showed that among California schools alone, more than 56,000 students graduated from the worst performing programs, virtually all of them for-profit schools. And those students had $930 million in debt to repay. The rule, unfortunately, has since been rolled back by the Trump administration. The administration has also taken steps to scale back rules, providing student loan discharges to students in connection with fraud or other illegal activities of their colleges, and it is not processing the claims of 210,000 applicants for borrower defense. State-level accountings of the claims by state for both total claims submitted and the claims still pending show that more than 1 in 5 borrower defense claimants are from California. The Trump administration's own version of the borrower defense rule, finalized in August, will leave borrowers to repay 97% of all of the debt incurred as the result of college's misconduct, and that is according to the administration's own calculations. Despite all of this, California has taken steps to address the risks faced by students at for-profit institutions. And in 2019, the state passed 3 bills which will allow California to step forward even as the federal government has stepped back. The first of those bills is AB 1340, which was authored by Assemblymember Chu, and that established a path towards making more reliable state-verified data about post-college employment outcomes available to students at for-profit colleges in California for the first time. This improved data will benefit both students and lawmakers as they evaluate which schools are preparing Californians for good jobs and which ones are not. Second, AB 1344 from Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Cahan improved the state's oversight process for out-of-state online schools, which enroll Californians. Most Californians enrolled in online programs actually attend California-based schools. We do a very good job of serving our own student body, but the students who enroll in programs outside of the state are at the schools where students are less likely to pay down their debt and more likely to defraud on it. Retaining and using California's authority to oversee these schools is a critical step to protecting Californians from unaffordable debt. And the last bill, AB 1346 from Assemblymember Medina, expanded relief for students seeking to rebuild their lives after their schools close. Going forward, students will be able to claim relief for any debt incurred to obtain their education, whether it was used to pay for tuition, housing, childcare, or any other recognized cost of attendance. 2020 is going to bring more opportunities for California to improve oversight for for-profit schools, because 2020 is the year when the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education, the agency charged with oversight for California's for-profit schools, will be up for sunset review and reauthorization. That process has historically represented an opportunity to evaluate what is working well at the Bureau and what needs improvement. TCAS looks forward to working with the members of this committee in 2020 on these issues and partnering with you to ensure the Bureau is reauthorized in a way that enhances oversight of colleges along with protections for students. While any agency has room to improve, the Bureau serves an essential oversight and consumer protection role for some of California's most vulnerable students, and it is imperative that those students be served well by the state of California. I thank you again for this opportunity to share thoughts, and after the next speaker, we will take some questions.
Good morning again, and before I get started again, I want to echo what everyone said and just thank you again, Chairwoman Petrie-Norris, for holding this hearing and giving us an opportunity to talk about these critical issues. Again, my name is Kat Welbeck. I'm a counsel at the Student Borrower Protection Center, where I focus on civil rights and fair lending issues in the student debt crisis. Prior to joining the SBPC, I spent 5 years in the External Affairs Division at the CFPB. And so I'm here today to talk about our nation's $1.6 trillion student debt crisis that's affecting nearly 45 million borrowers. And as we've heard throughout today, this crisis is touching borrowers in every corner of our country, including nearly 4 million borrowers here in the state of California. The average student loan debt balance nationwide is in excess of $33,000. Over 9 million borrowers are in default, and 3 million more are nearing default status. And as I said before, and as has been shared here today, the numbers here in California are equally dire, with over $140 billion in outstanding debt and 15.4% of student loan borrowers severely delinquent on their loans in the state. Across the country, over 1 million borrowers defaulted last year alone. That's one borrower defaulting every 28 seconds. And as this crisis unfolds in neighborhoods all across our country, borrowers and communities of color feel this burden most acutely. So they're really experiencing some of the most severe consequences associated with this crisis. Throughout the life cycle of their loans, borrowers of color face significant barriers that impede progress and compound the historic socioeconomic inequality faced by communities of color. More than 90% of African American and 72% of Latino students fund their higher education with student loans, in comparison with 66% of their white peers. The average white borrower pays down almost 95% of their loans 20 years after starting college, and that's in stark contrast to their black peers who still owe 95% of their original balance after the same period. Recent research from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has provided comprehensive data that further examines these disparities in loan performance for borrowers of color. predominantly Black communities have the highest and fastest growing student loan balances, with an average balance of $38,000, which is also greater than the national average. The Federal Reserve data also points to alarming trends of repayment disparities. Default rates are approximately 17.7% in majority Black zip codes, about 13% in Latino majority zip codes, and that's compared to 9% default rates in majority white zip codes. And here in California, the same rings true with regard to borrower distress. So findings from the Federal Reserve banks of both New York and San Francisco show the significant challenges facing borrowers of color in the state of California. So here in Los Angeles, default rates in predominantly minority zip codes are double those in predominantly white zip codes. Mirroring the demographic trends here and across the country, also in the Bay Area, zip codes with the highest level of delinquency and default also have larger percentages of Black and Latino residents. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco found that Bay Area communities with the largest percentages of Black and Latino residents had 19.9% of borrowers in delinquency, 15.3% of borrowers in default, and since 2003, 26.9% of borrowers in those communities have defaulted on a student loan, and that's about 3 times higher than neighborhoods with the lowest percentages of Black and Latino residents. So with a lot of similarities to the mortgage crisis of the past decade, we're seeing that predatory actors are preying upon borrowers of color, seeing them simply as a means to get rich. In 2018, we saw that California sued Navient for their deceptive servicing practices that cheated borrowers out of their rights to lower payment. Similarly, the CFPB, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Washington sued Navient for similar abuses the year before. Debt collectors are also more likely to sue Black and Latino borrowers than their similarly situated white peers. And African American borrowers are 50% more likely to be called by a debt collector than white borrowers with similar balances and rates of repayment. Right here in California, MALDEF also sued Wells Fargo for discriminating against qualified loan applicants based on their immigration status. Yet, in the face of all this mounting evidence that demonstrates the need for more rigorous oversight in the industry, we see that the Trump administration has really just turned its back on borrowers. The CFPB and the Department of Education are charged with protecting borrowers from these countless number of abuses that we've talked about today. But what we're seeing is that this inaction isn't really allowing the industry to run unchecked. And just last week, Democracy Forward, on behalf of student debt crisis, sued the Trump administration for neglecting its duty to supervise the student lending market. This lawsuit was filed with support from my organization, which is comprised of former senior CFPB officials who once led this critical oversight work. So the CFPB has pretty much abandoned its charge to supervise the federal student loan market and hired a former executive from one of the nation's largest servicers as its student loan ombudsman, despite numerous complaints launched against his former employer. And under Betsy DeVos's helm, the Department of Education has repeatedly tried to block efforts to hold servicers accountable for their practices. So in the absence of federal supervision, it's imperative that states and advocates stand in to protect borrowers from predatory and illegal market practices. That's why it's so important that we're here today having this discussion. And California really has the opportunity to lead the nation by passing Assemblymember Mark Stone's AB 376, for which our chair has been a strong advocate. This legislation, co-sponsored by the SVPC, provides a means for California to create protections for borrowers where federal action has waned. That's why our work here today is so important, and this committee can really help the Assembly understand the effects of this crisis and provide a foundation for evidence to justify further action. This legislator must act to protect the teachers who have been denied their right to public service loan forgiveness, the disabled veterans denied their right to have their loans discharged, and especially the millions of borrowers of color who are denied their civil rights. And so on behalf of my organization and dozens of other consumer, civil rights, and labor groups across the state that support AB 376, I urge California to offer a pathway forward for the millions of borrowers struggling under the weight of this historic debt, and in doing so, pave the way for the nation to address the student debt crisis. And so thank you again for the opportunity to be here today.
Well, and thank you. As you mentioned, I think Assemblymember Stone's student borrower bill of rights is such an important step, and one that I do hope will be successful in taking in the 2020 cycle. Are there other specifics when you look at kind of the landscape and the huge gap that we have, particularly given the actions or the inaction of the Trump administration? Are there other things that you look at and say that is a priority that we urgently need to address next year?
I can speak at least to the for-profit piece. As I foreshadowed a little bit, 2020 is going to be sunset review for the Bureau, and that does represent an opportunity to really do some assessments of how oversight is being conducted for these vulnerable communities, as well as what protections should be in place. I think that this year, there were actually, I talked about 3 bills, but there were other bills that were related to for-profit education. And I think that those bills offer a really good place to start in 2020. There were bills on incentive compensation. There was a bill on the 90-10 rule. There was a bill on, and there were 2 bills on conversions. So covert for-profits or for-profits that are converting to become nonprofits, as well as nonprofits being purchased by for-profits. So those were a lot of ideas. I think also we started the ball rolling. We've talked a lot about data gaps today. 1340 Assemblymember Chu's bill took a very important first step in closing some of those data gaps by making outcomes data available, like I say, for the first time for these students at for-profit schools. I think that opens the door to potentially looking at, could we recreate something like the gainful employment rule at the state level?
Right.
That was originally part of that bill, and I think is a really promising idea going forward. Could we do something like borrower defense at the state level? So there are these opportunities, especially because the federal government has taken a step back, for California to really step forward. I think those are all ideas that I hope to see come out in 2020.
And I've got my perspective, but I'm curious to know your perspective. Why have we encountered, like you said, I think that the for-profit package was 10 bills, maybe 11.
Seven.
Oh, it was 7. Okay. So, 3 of them made it through. Why do you think we've encountered such challenges when it comes to regulating for-profit institutions here in California?
I think that it is, it's a segment of students that hasn't historically, Patrick mentioned siloing earlier. I think that often we tend to focus on different segments of education and higher education in California. But I'm really excited to hear multiple people talk about the risks and so the harm that has happened to students at for-profit schools. I think that there is more attention being paid to it. I think that this was a big year. 2019 was 7 is a huge number of bills on this topic. So I think there was a lot more attention paid, and I think that as we learn, as folks learn more about this issue and become more informed, especially as we close the data gaps, there will be more evidence that can help support some of the policy positions that really need to be made. Anything you'd add? No.
Oh, yeah, and I was just going to touch on the servicing piece, just looking at the student lending crisis through the lens of civil rights and really seeing that, like I was talking about, a lot of the disparities between borrowers of color and their white peers, but also when we look at servicing, we see that borrowers of color aren't enrolling in income-driven repayment at the same rate as white borrowers, and we know that borrowers have much better outcomes when they are enrolled in income-driven payment plans, and so it's really looking at servicers to saying, why are we having these gaps if we know that borrowers are much less inclined to default? I believe it's 28 times less inclined to default when they're enrolled in IDR, but we're seeing that borrowers of color are nearly as likely to not be making payments as they are to be enrolled in IDR plans. So really making that push to what can we do to be looking at servicers and examining their practices and saying, why are we having these gaps? This is a civil rights issue, and where are we missing a place to protect borrowers?
Right, because then you talked about the fact that communities of color have a disproportionate share of debt, disproportionate share of defaults, and end up as a disproportionate share of the students that are enrolled in these for-profit institutions. You did speak to the fact that it seems that has been a deliberate targeting and marketing strategy. Are there, and it also seems as if there are, as you said, some disparities in servicing that suggest it can't just be an accident or a coincidence. Are there any other things that you think we need to be doing from kind of an education or communication perspective to try to close some of those gaps?
At the state level, I think that I want to say 2016, but don't quote me on that, the Office of Student Assistance and Relief was created at the Bureau for Private and Post-Secondary Education. They have, in their short tenure there, really tried to increase the amount of outreach that they are doing. They are trying to attend college fairs and do more information, or sharing more information with students at critical times. I think that that is really important. I'll repeat myself, I think that as we get more data, that will be valuable not only to students, but also to policymakers as we design programs that help guide students into programs and help fund their educations. I think having data on those outcomes and what really the results of that education will be will really help a lot. I think that TICAS loves data just in general, so I keep leaning on that, but I do think that it is a huge benefit to both students and policymakers to really be able to assess what the outcomes of these programs are, and then to be able to make educated and informed decisions about the policies we want to create around them. So that is one piece for me.
I really love what you said about the data piece, and I think that's something that's really powerful, that we also really believe that the more that we actually have this data, we can see that this really is a crisis. I know that we're able to say that there is a racial wealth gap in this country, and we know that white households have 13 times the wealth of black households and about 10% the wealth of Latino households. And so we can see that those gaps will create the issues where we have borrowers of color taking out more, but the more that we have data on servicing or data on outcomes, we're able to see these other issues that we're talking about today, because sometimes people will just say, well, oh, these are differences in socioeconomic status, but we actually know that when you're controlling for degree attainment, where you're controlling for GPA and all of those things, we're still seeing a gap between the borrowers. So just really reiterating the importance of having data to really pinpoint where these problems are coming.
Well, I love data as well. So, and I think we need to do more, data-driven policy making. But I think, because, to me, you mentioned the fact that there is, there's a wealth and income disparity there. That implies that a lot of these communities of color qualify for loans, qualify for programs that they're either not aware of or not applying for. And on the one hand, this feels like a huge intractable problem, but when you think about the amount of money we're leaving on the table, about the number of times it comes down to people not having good information, for-profit decision tends to be a little bit different, but most people are making a decision about what they're going to do for college at a point in time that we know where it is. So in terms of, for us as policymakers to be able to have an effective intervention, it is an easier intervention than in so many of the challenges that we grapple with, simply because it's happening at the end of high school. And we should be able to do an effective job of providing people with, a easy to understand, comprehensive set of information of, here's what you need to do, here are the financial aid programs that are available, and here's the options. It feels like we can do a better job of making that simpler for people, at least at that phase.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and especially for sort of your traditional coming out of high school
Right.
student. The tricky part is that for-profits
It's
are
the-
often
yes.
your non-traditional student. It is more common that you are going to have a returning student, a first-time college student that took a few years between high school and college, single parents, foster. Like, you're going to have for-profits really do tend to target the folks that have the least amount of sort of support. Unfortunately. And so, at least the bad actors do. And so it is there, like I say, there have been some steps. California is trying to take some steps with OSAR, the Office of Student Assistance and Relief at the Bureau really has done a good job of trying to reach students where they are. They're also partnering with trying to do some work on military bases, which is another big segment. Veterans and active military are often also one of those targeted demographics. So trying to find ways to reach those students, especially the non-traditional students, where they are, I think is also going to be really critical. And often tougher because as you say, they're not necessarily all round up in the high school. And so that is something that I think we probably could be doing a better job of.
Well, and I think I read, I don't know if this is an accurate statistic, but I read an article that said while the average community college student or four-year college student spends months and hours deliberating and researching, that the decision of where to attend a for-profit college oftentimes happens in it's like a minute. You see one ad, they say the right thing, you get that one phone call. Right. And people are not, there's not a lot of comparison shopping. Right. So I do think there's something that, again, there's ways for us to help people comparison shop, I think. And I'm curious, what do you think, because I'm hopeful that the rollout of our California's free universal community college, online college program, which is targeting, some of these non-traditional students, will help to sort of, fill that sense of unmet need and hopefully become the first place people go. Yeah. I don't know. Are you hopeful about that as a step forward?
Yeah,
okay.
I think that is. I'm hopeful for any opportunities to try to get students to have another first step, because as you say, recruitment is a big piece of for-profit schools, and so it is often that they got their name through a database or they did a Google search and put an email address in, and they will call you, they will recruit you. And so I think that any opportunity that we have to have another one-stop location, somewhere where folks know to go, and I think that even the online community college is an opportunity for students to consider their local community college. It is it's another place to draw folks into the community colleges and to really, I do think that it is a valuable tool in trying to redirect folks to some of the public institutions.
Great. Well, again, thank you for being here, and we'll look forward to working with you in the next session to make sure that these we get these bills through next
Wonderful.
year.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
And then with that, we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment. If there's anyone who would like to speak, we'll go ahead and form a line behind that microphone over there. And we just ask that people keep their comments to about 2 minutes so that everyone has a chance to share their perspective.
Thank you, Chairwoman Petrie Norris, again for having this hearing and for collaborating with a bunch of us advocates on student debt, on the student debt crisis, and everyone for attending. Samantha Sang with NextGen California. We are a proud co-sponsor as some of the solutions that were mentioned on AB 376 by Assemblymember Mark Stone, the Student Borrower Bill of Rights. And, again, I think as we heard today, these borrowers are at 17 or 18 years old and are taking on a debt that is going to have a lifelong impact, some serious impacts, and they have no consumer rights or protections the same way that anyone who's going to buy a house or get a credit card does. So again, I think we're proud to support AB 376 to provide some of those basic consumer protections for borrowers across the state. And NextGen is also working to provide some real-time solutions for borrowers. We're happy to partner with organizations such as Student Debt Crisis and other great advocates to provide that information and education to borrowers. But again, heartened to hear that some of the institutions are also taking on culture changes and doing their part in supporting students and borrowers in the best way. Nonprofit outreach and education can only go so far to put on the borrowers themselves. So the institution, I think, also share an equal responsibility to support borrowers and make sure they're set up in the best way, and especially the lenders and student loan servicers. These are paid for by our tax dollars, so they certainly should be providing excellent quality service. And with that note, this Saturday, we're also going to be providing some real-time services for folks in the LA area, a Free My Future Summit. Everything is free for borrowers there. You get your questions and answers, support services, some cash giveaway prizes for some immediate relief possibly. So please check out our website, nextgenpolicy.org, for our free My Future Summit. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hello, good morning or afternoon. My name is Celeste, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of California, Davis, and I'm here to provide a very personal reason as to why it's crucial to establish consumer protection standards for student borrowers. When I originally applied for my student loans, I was told by my loan service provider that I wouldn't have to make my first payment on my loans until 6 months after graduation. That would have been November of 2018. Then I earned a position as a California Senate Fellow. That's one of this country's most prestigious programs for those engaging in public service and the policymaking process in the California State Capitol building. Throughout the year, I was offered a year-long deferment, which would have prolonged my first payment to be due in September of 2019. However, in September, I received this envelope with 8 different letters informing me of a late fee that has been charged to my account. The service error has led me to owing now hundreds of dollars in late fees. That's unfair to me. And as a past blue and gold opportunity recipient, which ensures that I never have to pay tuition out of pocket, it's unfair. I can't afford that. As a Dean's List honoree, I cannot afford that. As someone who can barely afford breakfast every morning, I cannot afford that. As a low-income first-generation college woman, a woman of color, African-American woman, I cannot afford these hundreds of dollars in late fees. Passing this bill is not only vital for my well-being, it's also vital and crucial for the emotional, physical, and psychological well-being of over 4 million student borrowers in the state of California. I fear I will not be able to access the promise of a prosperous life that higher education has to offer without the support and advocacy of AB 376. This situation is unfair. However, there are groups working to alleviate the situation, and all I ask is that those people come to the table and allow us to discuss envelopes like these and opportunities to have the life that our parents, our communities have sacrificed so much for us to get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. I agree that is completely unfair, and I hope that there are some folks here today that can help you ensure that we address that specific issue. And like you said, it is about your personal story. It's also about making sure that everyone who's in that situation, that we pass AB 376, so we ensure this does not keep happening to people. So thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. I don't really want to follow you, but I will anyway. Suzanne Martindale, Senior Policy Counsel at Consumer Reports, proud co-sponsor of AB 376, working with a lot of wonderful people in this room to try to clean up the mess that policymakers at the national level have foisted upon all of us. I'm also a student borrower myself, and even as a lawyer who works on this stuff for a living, I've had loan servicers screw me over too. And that tells you all you need to know. Right, so we've talked a lot about data and counseling and information, and all of that is wonderful. It's necessary, but it is insufficient to fix the problem. Because the problem is we have put the burden of navigating this morass on individuals and their families. And there are private companies that profit off of that confusion. They are profiting. So the big loan servicers and debt collectors and all other manner of private actors, debt relief companies, we can throw them in there too, they're operating with relative impunity because we don't have the kinds of clear, enforceable consumer protections that people should have should they be put in a situation where in order to get an education, they have to take on a loan to do so. We protect people with mortgages. We protect people with credit cards. We're not doing the same thing for student loan borrowers. And as an advocate and a borrower myself, it makes me angry. It makes me angry. We should all feel angry because students, wonderful students like you, who are working so hard, you don't deserve that. No one deserves that. So our California bill would hold the companies, the private companies that profit off of these federal loan programs, would make them accountable to have to provide competent, well-trained staff, to have clear, accurate, actionable information. It would ban them from taking unreasonable advantage of your confusion over your loans, engaging in abusive practices, and if they violated any of those provisions, we could take them to court. So that bill is held up in Senate Appropriations right now. The Senate Appropriations chair, this is his district. So if anyone is interested in getting involved with this bill, with our partners at NextGen with the Week of Action, we want to make sure that this bill gets to the finish line because student borrowers can't wait any longer. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, for being here today. My name is Cody Hunanian. I'm the program director at Student Debt Crisis. We represent about 1 million supporters across the country impacted by student debt. And I first just want to acknowledge when we first started working on this issue, getting a room together this big to talk about this issue was impossible. So this is a big win just to be here talking about this issue, so thank you very much. I hear every day from dozens of borrowers who share their stories with us, who have similar stories as yours and have had their lives turned upside down by student loan debt. There's not enough public comment in the world to get through them, so I'll share my personal story with you as one of the 45 million people with student debt. I have student loans. I have a twin brother who also has student loans, and it took my parents and grandparents to co-sign on these student loans to pay for an education. My mother was totally and permanently disabled and was never told that student loan forgiveness was an option for her. My twin brother is a law enforcement officer here in this district, and he was never told that student loan forgiveness is an option for him because he's a public service worker. I've had to pay thousands in extra costs because of miscommunications between me and my student loan servicer. So in my own family alone, all of us have been hurt by student loan industry run amok. And that's why Student Debt Crisis and I personally are strong supporters and co-sponsors of the Student Borrower Bill of Rights. And so if anyone wants to get engaged with us and advocate for stronger consumer protections, please contact Student Debt Crisis or our co-sponsors as well, NextGen Policy, the SBPC, and Consumer Reports. But I think this legislation is extremely important. For now, advocates like us will continue to host workshops like we're going to do here today, but it is not enough. These are systemic issues that start with the student loan servicing companies and work their way down. So please continue to address this issue.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gustavo Concha. I'm a first-year physiological science student at UCLA and a volunteer intern with CalPERG students from Los Angeles, California. For many of us, pursuing any sort of higher education is in itself a risk. We take on this debt and we hope that it'll give us a chance for a better future. We just hope. I want to pursue a career in medicine, but there isn't a day that goes by that I don't worry about how much I'm burdening my parents and myself with just the cost of my undergraduate studies alone. After that, I'll have to take out even more to pay for med school, debts that even on a physician's payroll will take decades or even my entire lifetime to pay off. Compounding that stress is the reality that different loan servicers treat their borrowers very differently, and that might mean paying more over the lifetime of my loan just because of what servicer I was assigned to. Currently, Californians, and I know I don't have to tell you this, but Californians owe over $100 billion, $100 billion in just student loan debt. And most of us are just regular people. We're not financial experts. We're not lawyers. We need stronger protections to make sure that we're treated fairly and with dignity and not held hostage by the powerful financial industry. So I urge you to pass the Student Borrowers Bill of Rights and to encourage all of our state senators to vote yes on the bill this season. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Broke it. Good morning. I broke it again. Hold on. Good morning. Okay. Sorry, I'm not very experienced with microphones. Good morning. My name is Pravda Rai. I'm a third-year history major from UCLA. I'm originally from Kingsburg, California. I'm also the Affordable Textbooks Campaign Coordinator and a board member with CalPERG students. Being a first-generation and low-income student from the Central Valley, pursuing my higher education at the #1 public university wasn't something that I considered attainable. I consider myself extremely lucky and thankful to be receiving financial aid from Cal Grant A, the Pell Grant, as well as work study, which made it so much easier for me to find a job on campus, which allows me to actually afford other affiliated costs like textbooks and housing. But I do know that many of my peers, all across the state, they're not so lucky, especially my former high school classmates who are attending community colleges and for-profit schools. They have to take out loans in order to pursue their higher education. And for students who already have odds stacked against them already, these loans are necessary for them to actually have a secure future. That's a chance. And it comes with unanticipated risk, and currently student loan debt impacts over 4 million people in California. And this number is going to inevitably grow every single year. And for all of these people, their degree is going to perhaps turn from like a window of opportunity into, a crushing debt sentence. And to protect student borrowers, I hope you'll urge all of our state senators to support a Student Loan Borrowers Bill of Rights so we can pursue our education a little, more worry-free. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Krista McGuire. I'm doing the same thing. Western Region Director for Young Invincibles, a national policy and advocacy organization for young people. As you heard today, the way that student loans are being serviced is not only a financial issue, it's a social justice issue where we find low-income families and Black families and Latino families being disproportionately serviced ineffectively. Personally, Young Invincibles is also a co-sponsor of this bill, but for a very personal reason. I, too, was a first-generation college student. Funny story, I didn't even know that my single mother, I didn't know our family was low income until I did our FAFSA, and my EFC was 0. And I said, Mom, I think we're poor. And she's like, I've been trying to tell you that, you're not listening. That's a true story. Like, I can picture being at our dining room table back when FAFSAs were paper. But anyway, so because of that, I took out loans to help finance my career at a California State University. 4.5 years later, I left college owing $24,000, which wasn't too bad, right? It's under the average, everything's fine. But because I wasn't educated properly by my servicer, I didn't understand all of the rules. I didn't know that working for a nonprofit applied different benefits to me. I now owe $42,000, and I have been out of college for 15 years. And I have been in repayment. And these are the types of issues when we're saying, when we're talking about low-income families and first-generation families, when the servicers don't give you the information that you need to properly pay off your loans, you can't do it. It's not that we don't want to repay our debt, it's that we're trying to repay our debt and we don't have the skills and the resources to be able to do so effectively. So luckily in my family, I was able to educate my brothers, I was able to educate cousins behind me, and then my children won't have these same issues. But again, like Suzanne said, it shouldn't be left up to the individual to figure these things out, to pass this information down anecdotally through your family to help lift ourselves out of poverty. And so that's why bills like AB 376 need to come to fruition and be passed. So I urge you on behalf of Young Invincibles to urge your colleagues and the chairman of Appropriations Committee to pass it on through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Congresswoman. My name is Renford Ellis, and I am a UCLA, I attend UCLA. I'm doing my master's in social welfare and public policy, a dual master's. And actually, I'm here to share two things. I'm also a financial coach, and in my experience with working with individuals in Los Angeles County, I have witnessed in the Department of Mental Health particularly, there has been a very much a need in addressing the population with mental illness and being targets for their Social Security income. So one of my patients who I was working with, she enrolled in UEI, and they practically told her, hey, yes, you can pay for college, we'll go ahead, take out loans, and we'll also, it can be subsidized through, it can be paid for through your Social Security. It was just as easy as that, signature, and there she was enrolled. Now today, I don't know how she is doing with those student loans, if she has completed the program. I was only an intern at the time, and I could not do more than to just advise her. So that is a very particular need and perhaps a gap in things that we're not considering. Another thing, as also a student borrower, going from San Diego State to now UCLA, I actually, when I was making repayments for my loans, my servicer did not, with Great Lakes, did not even know how to calculate my interest rate. So when I was asking them about how to go about making those payments, obviously I already knew that I needed to make the payments towards the highest interest rate, but they did not know how to calculate day-to-day interest, how that accumulated, what would be my outcome in 2 or 3 years. So that was a huge disappointment. I did not expect that at all, but I wouldn't be the only one. So today I am here also working with Consumer Reports with Suzanne. I want to thank you for this opportunity. We are also reaching out because we're working with our Masters in Public Policy, doing our thesis and advocating towards the Bill of Rights, Borrowers' Bill of Rights, and we want to interview folks to hear about your experiences as student borrowers. We would really appreciate helping us in data collection so that we can bring forth these stories and push for this bill. Okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who joined us today, especially to our excellent panelists, both for being here and for all the work that you're doing on this really critical issue. I think for me, I come away with a couple of takeaways. So, number one, we clearly need to ensure that we are doing more to protect our student borrowers, and I think that starts with more effective consumer protection legislation and oversight. We talked quite a bit about AB 376 as being a really critical first step in that journey, and it's certainly one that I will be advocating for next session alongside so many of you. I think the second thing that I take away from this really is just the point we made in the first panel, that we are leaving a lot of money on the table. And I think that there is a lot that we can do as California to ensure that we're helping our California students get every federal dollar that's available, and that we put that to good use. And then third for me is the need to continue the conversation around Cal Grant expansion. As we talked about in the first panel, the growth of the Cal Grant has, certainly not kept up with the pace of inflation and the pace of cost of living here in California. And we have got to address that so that we ensure that our students who are here to learn, to get a degree, to start their career, and to ultimately achieve that dream of living a better life, that they can do that work and not worry about where they're going to sleep or how they're going to eat for the month. So those are some of my big takeaways. And I think the other takeaway for me really is that there's a powerful group of advocates assembled right here in this room from so many different organizations and from so many different institutions. And I think, like someone made the point that several years ago, when you were talking about the subject of student debt, you couldn't get a group like this together. I think that you all have done so much to elevate this conversation, to make clear that this is a crisis that's not just impacting the millions of student borrowers here in California. It has ripple effects all across the California economy, and we need to urgently address it so that we ensure that our student borrowers are able to buy homes, that they're able to start a family, that they're able to invest in their futures, and that we're able to start to close some of the generational wealth gaps that we talked about in one of our panels. But I have to say I'm very encouraged by the group of folks that are here, and I think that your advocacy is going to ensure that we're able to take some really concrete and meaningful steps in next year's legislative session. So thank you for that. This conversation will certainly inform our legislative agenda as we move forward. It is certainly the beginning of a conversation and not the end, but look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thanks so much.